Welcome in to the One South Coast Chamber podcast, the official podcast of the One South Coast Chamber, serving the business communities of southeastern Massachusetts. Today, I'm your host, Ian Trombley, Vice President of Public Policy, and today we're doing a Policy Pulse edition, an edition where we discuss different public policies and the impacts they have on the business community here in southeastern Massachusetts. For today's episode, I am thrilled to be joined by State Representative Mark Sylvia. Representative Sylvia represents the 10th Bristol District, which includes a portion of Acushnet and New Bedford in the towns of Marion, Mattapoisett, Rochester, and Fairhaven.
Got it.
Mark is in first term of serving in the House of Representatives, and in my opinion, is off to a truly impressive start of his career in the legislature. Mark, welcome in. Thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here.
Awesome, Mark. Yeah, so you've been in the position for about a year now, and I think you've off to an truly incredible start. One of the best starts I've ever seen from a freshman legislator. You really hit the ground running. But let's take a step back, since this is your first time on the podcast, and we are technically out of your district currently. We're recording in Fall River, but listeners will be all across the South Coast and more, hopefully. Who is Mark Sylvia? Like, who are you? What's your past, and what made you want to run in the first place?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Ian, for the opportunity to be on the show. I think this is an invaluable service that you provide to the people on the South Coast to get to know their business leaders and elected officials. Yeah. So thank you for that.
Oh, of course.
And happy to come to Fall River, by the way. We are allowed outside of
That's
our
one
districts.
It is. You know, we've tried to work on that, but yeah, we're breaking down some serious barriers.
Yeah, that's great. Love it. So I grew up on the South Coast. I am a lifelong resident of the town of Fairhaven. My dad grew up in Fairhaven, and my mom grew up in Acushnet. And so, grandparents, big family in the whole greater New Bedford area, which is nice in my role. The district that I represent, I've lived in my entire life. Yeah. So I went through the Fairhaven Public Schools, went to college in D.C., got my bachelor's and my master's degree there. Knew I wanted to be involved somehow in public service. That's something that my parents taught me, my grandparents. So started out on the school committee and went to work for the town of Plymouth. Okay. As the special assistant to the town.
School committee in what town?
Fairhaven.
In Fairhaven, okay.
Yep. So I spent 6 years on the school committee and was ultimately the town manager in Plymouth. That was my first professional career, was in the town of Plymouth in different roles and as town manager, which for viewers, it's kind of like an unelected mayor. You're day-to-day, chief administrative officer. Right. And that was at age 30 for me, when I think back, that was pretty young, but it was an amazing experience because you had the obligations and responsibilities of making sure that local public services are delivered to the constituents in a community that's 60,000 people and 103 square miles. So that was, my first foray into public service. I was elected town moderator in Fairhaven, which I still am, but then went into state government. And I worked for the administration of Deval Patrick as the Commissioner of Energy Resources and then as the Energy Undersecretary, which was an amazing experience. Again, like when I was town manager, I was relatively young and, I describe myself as an accidental energy guy. Yeah. Because I was really on the, public administration side of things. And then I decided it was important to go into the private sector and get some private sector experience. So I worked for a startup that eventually was acquired, which was great, which is a big solar development company. Okay. And then Bill Strauss, the long-term incumbent, who was the chair of transportation in his final years in the House, decided he wasn't going to run again. And it's something I've always wanted to do. And I thought it was important for losing Bill, who had all of that experience and knowledge, that it was important for us to have somebody in that office that could hit the ground running, that had that state and local experience, private sector experience, grew up in the community, and had a real desire to help make a difference. And so it was an easy decision for me to make. And I'm kind of in some ways a non-traditional new freshman rep. Yes. 51 years old. A lot of times they're younger people. But for me, it's something I've always wanted to do. And I'm glad that I did it. And I'm having a lot of fun. Yeah. And feel like I'm making a difference. Yeah, you certainly are. And I think the South Coast delegation is unique and quite
I'd say 10 years ago, there was a sentiment, I'd say, along the South Coast, like, we're not Boston. Everyone's forgetting about us. We don't get, our share of the pie. And it seems like there's been a serious transition, from my opinion, thanks to several folks that have taken leadership positions, including Bill Strauss, of course, who was significant in getting South Coast Rail here. And I'm confident that you are going to work your way up and definitely have a significant role in the South Coast delegation, helping pull our weight down here. So we're in good hands. I'm sure of that.
Well, and I appreciate you mentioning we are a pretty close-knit delegation, and it's certainly the New Bedford delegation, but I would say the South Coast delegation, to your point. So the Greater Fall River delegation and the Greater New Bedford delegation work really closely together.
Yeah.
And have a lot of mutual respect for each other, and it's less about ego and more about getting things done and supporting each other in that effect.
Yeah.
So you're right, and that makes the job even more fun because you're not competing against each other. You're all swimming in the same direction, which is what our constituents expect.
Absolutely. So we're 1 year in.
Yes.
What do what did you probably had some expectations going in? Were those expectations met? What did you really enjoy? Were you surprised by things? Tell us about reflecting on kind of because we're just over 1 year now, right?
Yeah.
So
and I've been through one budget cycle.
Right. Starting your second now.
Yes.
This will be
Started literally. Yesterday when the governor filed House 2, we're off to the races. The House goes next in terms of the budget.
Yep.
So it's been an incredible year. I think both, there were things that I knew and things that I didn't know. So I knew going in that I we all have some form of a learning curve. It's just how big that learning curve is.
Yep.
And so for me, it was really the process itself. How frequently do we have formal sessions? How ultimately does the committee process work once we hear bills? So that was the part that, I had to learn a little bit more than what I knew.
Yeah.
And I think as a result, I dug in right away and was able to, secure earmarks for my district in the first budget for, Council on Aging upgrade, a kitchen upgrade at the Fairhaven Council on Aging, funding for food security with Coastal Food Shed, and other priorities, both in the budget, but also working with Senator Rodrick, for example, who I share Rochester with. Together, we were also able to secure some funding for a new website design at the Plum Library, which is critical for people to interact with the library that don't necessarily go to the library physically. We just went to that unveiling, and it was amazing to see what the Plum Library's done. And it was, the trustees flagging it as a important priority, me meeting with them, and then trying to identify funding and working with Senator Rodrick to find that funding. So those local funding priorities were a lot of fun to secure because you've helped. You're part of a group of people that are addressing a problem together. It's a team effort, and I think all of the constituent services we've been able to do a lot in helping towns navigate through state agency related challenges or individual constituents with unemployment insurance claims and everything in between.
Right.
Or even trying to help tackle the traffic safety issues on Route 6 between the New Bedford Bridge and the Marion-Wareham line. So, really digging in on a lot of things and showing up. I didn't appreciate how much people appreciate when you show up to different events.
Yeah.
Just showing up and being part of the conversation, even, with One South Coast and all that you do on different topics.
Yeah.
And it's so important for us to be there and listen because we can be better legislators, we can be better leaders.
I couldn't agree more, and obviously I'm a little biased because we love to have you show up to everything. But it really is so important. You have been extremely available, and whether it's our government affairs committee meeting with business owners, whether it's a ribbon cutting of a small business or a growing business, you're there, you're showing your support. It does matter. It really does, particularly to the residents and the businesses. It makes a difference when you're there, whether it's to give them a proclamation, just introduce yourself, whatever it might be, because they might need something in the future. Now they know who you are. It's not, sometimes I think ribbon cuttings get a bad name, like, oh, you're just there for the picture, but it's so much more than just a picture.
Right. It's a celebration.
Yeah.
Right. And we have the ability to give citations in recognition of people's accomplishments. And I've really come to appreciate that. So I see my job is a three-legged stool. One is legislating, that's obvious. You file bills, and we can talk about the bills I filed, but you file bills and you vote on legislation. That's one leg. The second leg is what I would call constituent services,
right.
Advocating for and finding ways to support individual constituents, but also your cities, your towns, your businesses.
Yep.
And then the third is showing up and acknowledging and recognizing the talent and success of people in your community. You have that. I have that ability as a representative through my social media channels and through my engagement with other representatives and even the executive branch to really promote the people that live in our district. And that, to me, is probably, one of the best parts of the job is just to be there to acknowledge people for everything that they're doing.
Yeah, totally.
Big and small.
Agree. Yeah, absolutely. And to go back to that first leg, I believe it was, the legislating piece, do you want to talk about your committee assignments in your first year and maybe, like you mentioned, some of the bills that you've filed or been supportive of?
Sure. So at the beginning of the session, you're asked, what committees do you want to be on? You give us your top three. That's what we're told. And so I did that, but I also put little explanations, justifications for each, whether they get read or considered, I don't know, but it's worth it to me to just explain why I want to be on these committees. And one of the top choices was environment and natural resources. And the justification I gave is it's very important for my district because they deal with everything from water and wastewater issues. And we know there are some challenges with wastewater, both in terms of, federal requirements, but also costs, and then the impact of the delays in actually upgrading wastewater treatment plants and how that impacts our shellfish industry.
Absolutely. I live down the south end of New Bedford, looking at your district from my window, and we have that wastewater, and it can. My wife swam in the Buzzards Bay, swim and stuff, and that had to be canceled due to water quality. So it's important that you're on that. Really.
Yeah. So I explained that when I gave my list of priority committees. That was one of them. And it's, we're also a coastal community. Yeah. We also have an aquifer that has drinking water. We also have a lot of land. We have DCR properties, So I was glad to have been appointed to Environment and Natural Resources. The other major committee is Labor and Workforce Development, which, is very much in alignment with what you all do at the Chamber, and working on workers related issues. And we just passed on Wednesday an apprenticeship program law, which I think is something that is really important. It's certainly been a priority. So labor and workforce cuts across every district in many ways. So that was one that I didn't ask to be on, but was put on, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, we're grateful that you're on it too. We're lucky because, like you said, labor, that's got to be one of the top issues for a Chamber of Commerce and business communities. Looking for, we want to have a strong workforce in our region. We want businesses to be able to hire locally, right? And other issues like unemployment, like you mentioned earlier, that's really important. We're glad to have your representation on there.
And workers' benefits and the like. And then there are two other committees that I'm on. One is federal funding, which is a House-specific committee, and then climate action and sustainability, likely because of my background in the clean energy space.
Yeah.
But we've on both labor and workforce development and environment and natural resources, we've heard a number of bills. There are over 7,000 bills that were filed at the beginning of this session. And so, and I've been at every meeting. We have new rules, which I'm happy about, which provides more transparency, I think, for the legislature. And that includes taking attendance to make sure that your legislator is actually attending the hearings of the committees they're on. Once we hear bills, there's now a deadline for when we take action on those bills. In the past, they could languish forever and ever and ever.
Right.
Summaries are provided in advance. How we vote on committee polls, which is when we decide what recommendations we're going to make on bills, that's all public and published on our website. So, I take my committee responsibilities very seriously, and you learn a ton. There are so many topics that, like pesticides and rodenticides, that's just one that I didn't know much about. And you have interesting characters. We actually had a hawk. Somebody brought a live hawk.
A live hawk, wow.
Yeah, because they eat these rodenticides and it kills them. And so to prove that point, and we had someone dressed as a poop emoji that showed up and testified on wastewater stuff. So it can be very interesting and colorful, but at the end of the day, you hear from people whose lives are impacted positively or negatively from either action or inaction of the legislature. And so I really enjoy it because it also gives me the opportunity to get better educated on issues that maybe I wasn't completely familiar with, and those that I am. So.
Right. No, that's great, and we're glad to have you on those committees. Like I mentioned, I do think we cover. I'd say, I should actually check it out, but almost all between the South Coast delegation, I think we have members on or senators on almost every committee, which is a really great thing.
Yeah. So and bills. So I have 13 bills that have been filed this session. Some of them are home rules, which are bills that are initiated by town meetings in the towns. I'm proud to say I'm the first freshman to get a bill signed into law by the governor.
Wow.
Which was great. That's
first freshman this session?
This session.
Okay.
Yeah, this session.
Yeah, wow. That's awesome.
And it was a home rule from Mattapoisett. And I have two other bills, one a home rule from Rochester and a home rule from Acushnet that have been signed by the governor. So I'm up to 3.
Wow.
And that takes you engaging with each committee each step of the way, because it's not like a bill is introduced, you have a committee hearing, and then boom, you vote on it. There's 3 different votes in the House before it gets to the Senate, and they go through the whole same thing. And working with my senator. In the case of Mattapoisett, the Mattapoisett and Acushnet home rules, working closely with Senator Montigny and us agreeing that we would only file one of those bills, because you could technically file a home rule in both.
Yep.
But then that slows things down. So we've agreed to work together to file jointly, which is great. And that's the way to do it. And to have our respective staffs working together to make sure we can get those bills through. And with the Rochester bill with Senator Rodrigues as well. So it's great to have that kind of relationship with your Senate colleague, because in the House, you're only part of the process. The Senate is the equal part of the process, and you have to work together, and we do. But then I filed some bills that were more standalone bills that were really, I thought, certainly what I campaigned on and what I think are really important. So one is increasing veterans benefits, and looking at cost of living and affordability, but also local industry. So I filed 2 bills on the cranberry industry that were part of their priority from a 2017 strategic plan to try and stabilize and grow the cranberry industry in Massachusetts. So filed 2 bills on that, as well as filing bills on traffic safety and on other priorities that were really important to the district. So 13 in total right now. 3 have been signed by the governor. A few have either been accompanied to other bills, which means they take that and add it to a bigger bill.
Yep.
One went to study, but the Senate version of that same bill is still live. So I'm happy that was the increasing the veterans tax work-off program from $1,500 to $2,000.
And study normally means
for all intents and purposes, it's a death knell. It's parked there and it's not going to come out. It could come out.
Yeah,
but
particularly
then it has
with the Senate side being, it sounds like it's got a little more hope over there.
Yeah, and it was the identical House bill and Senate bill.
Okay. And
so the senators on the committee decided they were going to go first on that one, and that's fine because it's literally the same language.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, I think Senator Sear and I both raised the awareness on that particular topic.
Okay.
So I'm very happy with the fact that those bills have moved, and then we get to co-sponsor bills too.
Right.
And so I've been very thoughtful in what I've put my name to. I think I've actually co-sponsored close to 90 bills.
Oh, wow.
But out of 7,000, it's
drop in the bucket.
Yeah, but in each one of those cases, it's either something that constituents reached out to me on, or it's something that's aligned with, my priorities, which are addressing cost of living, protecting basic rights, and supporting cities and towns. Because I think the other big part of all of this is helping our cities and towns, trying to find ways to provide more funding to cities and towns, both for their general operating budget, but for construction projects and things that communities are struggling with right now because, they're faced with the potential of an override just to keep services.
Yeah, it seems like more. I'm hearing about more and more towns popping up talking about overrides, and it seems like they're just struggling. And times haven't been that bad, yet, or so far. So it's good to be aware of that because it might not get easier for those cities and towns. Yeah, as we head into the future. 6 months left in the formal legislative session, right? It ends on July 31st. There was some rule changes, though, right? Yeah, talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so prior to my joining the legislature, it was, there was, in essence, a hard stop in the second year. We're one of a few full-time legislatures in the country, and it's a 2-year term. But under our rules and the Senate's rules, July 31st of the second year is the end of the session.
Yep.
So one would assume, okay, well then after that, nothing substantive can get passed, which wasn't necessarily true either, but it was a lot harder.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have to move heaven and earth to vote on something after July 31st. So one of the things that happened this session, which I'm proud of, is that we voted on new rules. And those rules, I think, were driven in part by, the results of question 1 on the ballot. Right. And I knew and I voted for it in part to help drive that transparency.
Which was the audit, right?
Yeah.
That was the audit of the legislature.
Yep. So these rules, I think, came about as a result of, overwhelmingly people have signaled that they want to see more transparency. Right. So the legislature enacted new rules that we talked about, some of the transparency rules with the committees.
Yep.
But it also has given more ability to take big, important issues after July 31st. So I think the rule is that they have to be conferenceable, meaning you can meet in conference, but we don't have that same hill to climb to take up substantive legislation after July 31st, which I think is right.
Yeah.
We should be able to take up big pieces of legislation through December 31st.
Right.
And so those rule changes give us that much more flexibility to do that. Yeah. And inevitably, at the end of the last session, they passed the economic development bill, they passed a citing reform bill, and they passed, I think, an additional healthcare bill after July 31st. Right. But that was closer to the end of the year. Yeah. So I'm glad to see that there's more flexibility. There's more to do. From a transparency perspective, certainly there's more to do, but I'm proud of the fact that, these new House and joint rules are much more transparent than they were. Yeah.
The legislature, I think, has clearly taken that into consideration in these new rules. That was an overwhelming vote, so it's good to see that. So with a 6-month, potentially full year almost ahead of you in the second year of the session, anything you want to focus on or try and accomplish?
Yeah. So for me individually, certainly it's getting the rest of my bills over the finish line. There are some home rules right now that have gone from the House to the Senate, and so shortly, hopefully, they'll make their way through the Senate and then on to the governor for signature. So legislatively, certainly seeing those bills through to the end is an important individual priority for me.
We have 10 more, right? Is that right? Am I doing my math right? You've got 3 done so far, 13
10
filed?
More.
Okay.
Yep, 10 more. Yep. And some of which are already out of the House and in the Senate and will get passed. So even if it's 10 out of the 13 in total or whatever it is, I'm very proud of the fact
that would be a great batting average.
Yeah,
no kidding.
Yeah. But there are also big issues that we are taking up, that we know we're going to be taking up. So you and I just earlier referenced the governor's budget. She filed it. The House goes next. And so over the next few months, we'll be working through our Ways and Means Committee on the budget. We'll vote on that budget, and then it'll go over to the Senate. And that will be a very important, obviously, legislative action that we take. On the topic of energy affordability, that is a very important issue to my constituents, certainly to you and everyone else on the South Coast and really across the Commonwealth. And there was a bill that was reported out in November in the House, and there's more work that needed to be done to engage different stakeholders on that. But I and House Ways and Means met with all of us last week. And I should say, for me, as someone who was in the energy space from the beginning, last year in January and February, I was on the phone with the DPU, with Eversource, with the Department of Energy Resources, with the ratepayer advocate from the Attorney General's office, doing everything I could as an individual to first understand their perspective on what's happening, but also to advocate for change. And then when the energy bill was being crafted, I met with the chair of the committee. I met with the former chair of the committee. I put together my thoughts, shared that on paper. I've done that again since the energy bill was released in November. And we'll continue to, you don't have to be on a committee to make a difference. And also, have been part of circulating different letters that we've submitted to the DPU, opposed to the rate hikes that Eversource had proposed for this fall for gas in particular. So, even though I'm not on that committee, I can be as much of a strong advocate. And in some ways, it gives you more flexibility.
Right. That's important. Right. So we talk about constantly, if for the listeners on the podcast have probably heard me reference this over and over again, but competitiveness in general, right? Affordability across the state. And I typically say the big three are energy, housing, and healthcare costs, right? And energy, particularly these couple weeks, right? It's 0, 10 degrees out. It's frigid out there, and those energy bills are going to be high. So it's good, that we have, the legislature looking at this energy bill. I'm hopeful that there'll be some changes.
Me too.
I have to imagine something will get done. It's particularly after last year's rates, it were just really astronomical. So I'm encouraged to have you, who's truly an energy expert on this. One funny memory I have is last year during our legislative luncheon. It was your first one we attended. Well, and actually, it was your second. You attended the first year, when you were running. But your first one up on the panel, and we asked an energy affordability question, and the entire South Coast delegation stuck their heads forward and looked down the table at Representative Sylvia to answer, which I'd never seen before. That gave me a chuckle.
It gave me a chuckle.
Yeah,
too.
but it's fair. You are truly the energy expert on the delegation, so I'm glad to hear that you are an active participant in this discussion.
Yeah, and it needs to be very hyper focused on affordability, more than anything else. And some of it the legislature can do in the shorter term, but some of it is the utility structure we have and how do we reform that structure to provide more relief as well. So there's not one solution. There's multiple solutions to really get at this problem and provide relief for people. And so I'm hoping that is one of many steps in many sessions. So we can't just say, hey, we're done this session. I think there's more work to be done beyond this session, but we need to provide relief sooner rather than later. And then we have an environmental bond bill that our committee heard. It's in bonding now, which is a bill that will provide significant dollar commitments to environmental projects, which you would think, what does that exactly mean? And it's everything from investing in our state parks, of which we have multiple ones in the district, but it's hopefully also providing more funding for things like wastewater treatment projects. And for smaller projects in communities, we can get bond authorizations for local projects. And so I've already consulted with the communities that I represent. I have a good list of what their environmental bond authorization projects are. Keep in mind, they're authorizations, so it's really up to the administration, once it passes, to bond for those dollars.
Okay.
And then if you have those projects that have been authorized as part of that, there's a higher likelihood they'll get funded. There's never a guarantee with bond authorization, but at least if you're advocating and getting those projects on a list,
Right.
that when the time comes and those projects or that funding is bonded, then you can advocate for your projects more easily because they're on that list. So an environmental bond bill will make big investments in environment and natural resource related issues, land use, land preservation, coastal preservation, like all of those things are really important to us as well, and wastewater and water issues. But the environmental bond is going to be a big one as well. And you're right. I mean, housing, healthcare, and energy are likely to continue to be priorities in each session.
Right.
Like it's never going to be the case that we're going to not try to further address, because you're not one and done. You shouldn't be one.
Yeah. We're so far behind. I want to say, don't quote me on this, around 200,000 units that Massachusetts needs to build. And it's certainly not going to get done in one session or from one bill. So I know there's discussions, it sounds like, about some sort of housing bill that will be released. So is that a priority? Housing. What are your thoughts on? It seems like there's such a shortage of housing right now. What are your thoughts? Are you seeing that in your district?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a problem across the Commonwealth, and it's not just shortage of housing; it's availability of housing and the affordability of it, right? So, especially for young families, it's hard to find that first home because of the costs in the market. So, the Homes Act was passed last session before I became a member, which was the largest investment that Massachusetts has committed to the issue of housing, probably in our history.
Yeah.
And so part of that I think is important is getting out and implementing as much as possible, because there are a lot of different tools that are available, everything from now ADUs, which, are by right across the Commonwealth. So communities are working through their bylaws to make sure that they're able to provide ADUs by right. There are funding programs, and the governor in this budget has also committed more funding towards housing. So that's something that we have to continually be building on. And same with healthcare. That is probably going to be one of the biggest factors in what our budget ultimately looks like at the end of the day, because we know the federal government has made some decisions that are unfortunate at and being kind,
right?
But that are going to have an enormous impact on our ability to provide health care to the residents of Massachusetts. And so we're going to have to figure out how big of a hole do we have to fill, and how do we do that, and provide our residents with health care. One of the votes we took several months ago was to fund $250 million to our community hospitals.
Yeah.
Including South Coast,
right?
In anticipation of knowing that there are people that are going to lose their health insurance, and the only place you can go when you lose your health insurance is the emergency room,
right?
Which is not the answer for the individual or for the Commonwealth,
right?
And so, in anticipation of that, we appropriated $250 million for that purpose. So, healthcare is going to continue to be, the cost of prescription drugs, and the fact that the ACA credits weren't reauthorized, and the cuts in Medicaid. So both Chairman Michaelwitz and Chairman Rodrick's they work really well together.
Yes.
It's great to see that you've got a Senate and House Ways and Means chair that work well together.
Right.
And they've done, I think this is their 8th budget they're going to build together. Yeah. And so, I have a lot of confidence in what they're going to, each in their respective chambers do to try to address this. And so that's going to be obviously another big priority.
Right. Yeah. It's scary. There's so much uncertainty around healthcare right now, right? Costs are going up, but when we want access to healthcare and good healthcare, you want it to be the best, right? And then we got our community health, our community hospital in South Coast Health right here. And, their public payer mix is very high, and we want them to be paid equally to the Boston hospitals so that we, residents and businesses down here, are getting the best possible treatment they can, equal to Boston, and they do a great job managing that, but it's not easy.
Yeah, and it's to your point. We were briefed by South Coast Hospitals, or South Coast Health. They did a economic impact study.
Right.
And it is, and I'm not surprised. I mean, a large number of my family, my mother's one of several nurses in my family that worked in the South Coast system. And so I'm not surprised at it being, largest employer, largest private employer, their economic development impact locally, how much small businesses that provide supplies.
Absolutely.
So I mean, that is very important. But then there's the issue of primary care and the lack of primary care docs, and how do we address that? And there have been multiple bills filed on that topic too. So healthcare is something that's going to always be there.
Yeah.
And we need to continuously be thinking and legislating on ways to make it better for our residents.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I'm glad you highlighted the economic impact study. We got a similar presentation, and it's quite incredible, and I encourage any listeners who are interested to check it out. I mean, they're beyond providing, incredible healthcare, their impact on the local economy and the business community, and like you said, with vendors and small businesses, and the list goes on and on. People or your family or friends that work there or receive care. It's really impressive. So we're always nervous when funding for healthcare, gets cut. Right. So it's a good point. Mark, anything else before we close out that you want to highlight?
No, I mean, I just that, particularly for our listeners today that are in the district that I represent, which is the 10th Bristol, as you said, Fairhaven, Mattapoisett, Marion, Rochester, precincts in Acushnet, and in the city of New Bedford in Ward 1. That I'm always accessible. I have an amazing legislative director, Betty DeBenedictis.
Betty does an incredible job.
Yeah,
yes.
She's been up there for 18 years. She's worked for a Democrat and a Republican, so she's got a very good reputation and a lot of respect from both caucuses. Oh. Plus, she's built relationships with people in state government that, whenever we have a constituent issue, she easily knows who to pick up the phone and call on our behalf. So I just want to encourage your listeners that I happen to represent that please do reach out to us either by, we're accessible. There's a state legislature website that has all of our contact information, but we are always, people can email me at mark.sylvia@mahouse.gov. We follow those every day, all the time, because that's usually the best way to communicate, or that constituents feel most comfortable communicating with us. But that, I do office hours in each of my communities each month. That's all on my website. So I'm trying to be as accessible as possible, but people don't be shy. Please do reach out, because if you need something that we can be helpful with, we'll be helpful.
Absolutely. Are you on social media?
I am. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. Both we're constantly communicating. So you can find me on Facebook. You can find me on
and
Instagram.
we'll tag those accounts when we post this episode. So I can't speak highly enough of how accessible you are, how available you are. What a great addition you've been to this South Coast delegation. We're really fortunate and lucky to have you.
Thank you. It's teamwork, right? At the end of the day.
It is. It really is. It's a joint effort across the whole delegation, across the residents, across the business community. So we're very fortunate, representatives. So with that, I'll close it out. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in to this edition of the Policy Pulse, part of the One South Coast Chamber podcast. Make sure to follow, subscribe, and leave a review of the show wherever you get your podcasts. Also, remember to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok at One South Coast Chamber for daily updates. See you next time.